Hello, my old friends. Bigfoot here. How are you doing these days? Still holding up well?
Bigfoot's been so weak lately. No strength left at all. And no money to go see a doctor. Hi.
I'm so weak these days. Food doesn't taste good. Water doesn't go down easy. Hi. Bigfoot has no energy at all.
Ha! Did you hear that? Bigfoot's back is falling apart, but at least it still works.
Wait. These are strange tracks. Looks like someone's been here. An intruder? Who are they? They look so strange. I've never seen anything like this before. What are they doing here? Are they planning to invade my forest?
No way! I must find a way to stop them!
I must go report this to the police. There are intruders. If I do not, I will lose my forest.
Hello, police? This is Bigfoot calling. Intruders in my forest. Send backup right now. Next up, please listen carefully, my friends. Love you.
They let me walk away. That's the part that still jolts me awake in a cold sweat, even 3 decades later. Not the thunderous roars that tore through the Appalachian night. Not the dinner plate footprints sunk deep into the mud. Not even the moment I realized I was cornered in a cave with a 9-foot mother shielding her young. What haunts me is the truth I can't escape. I survived October of '92 not because of my training, not because of my revolver, not even because I thought I was tougher than the wilderness. I survived because something out there, something smart enough to track me, surround me, and end me in a heartbeat chose not to. This is the account I've never laid out in full. 7 days in the backcountry of the Appalachians that tore apart everything I thought I knew about America's wild places. This isn't some feel-good tale about man versus nature. This is a confession. The day I learned that out in the old woods, where few people ever set foot, we're not the top of the food chain. Not even close. Back then, I was an experienced survivalist. My whole life was built on testing myself against the elements. I modeled my philosophy after Ernest Shackleton, the Antarctic explorer who endured the worst conditions ever thrown at man. Like him, I believed preparation, grit, and willpower could get me through anything. I'd spent years proving it. From the frozen heights of the Rockies to the blistering deserts of the Southwest, I'd pushed myself to the edge. I could coax fire from wet wood, rig shelters to hold against a blizzard, and read the stars well enough to walk straight through a trackless night. The Appalachians were supposed to be my crown test, ancient, fog-choked ridges that still held onto their secrets. My chosen ground was a stretch of Monongahela National Forest in West Virginia. Remote, desolate, no cell towers, no lifeline. The closest road was 40 miles behind me. It was October of 1992, and I planned 7 days alone, climbing high peaks and pushing my skills to their limit. I prepped like my life depended on it. Essentials only, military compass, topo maps sealed in waterproof sleeves, a bag rated for deep cold, and rations measured down to the day. The one thing I never compromised on was my .357 Magnum, 6 rounds of insurance against anything with teeth and claws. Shackleton wrote about the dangers of Antarctic predators. I took his lesson to heart. October in Appalachia is a paradox. The hills glow with fire red and gold leaves, a beauty that could break your heart. But the weather turns on a dime. A bluebird sky at noon can become a lethal storm before dusk. Temps can nosedive 30 degrees in a couple of hours. I set out before dawn on October 12th. My plan was simple: hike 20 miles in, set up a base, then work out from there, each day harder than the last. The route carried me through hardwood forest, over icy streams, and toward the kind of summit most folks will never even see on a map. That first day, everything was textbook. My legs carried me smooth and steady, every muscle trained for the work. The woods hummed with life squirrels stashing acorns, birds calling overhead, a lone woodpecker hammering somewhere out of sight. Nothing unusual, nothing threatening, just the forest doing what it always does. By late afternoon, I had camp set up beside a clear mountain stream. High ground, clean water, good sight lines, everything by the book. I stacked my firewood, dug a proper ring, and ate a simple meal of jerky and hardtack before the light bled out of the sky. That night, I sat by the flames, maps spread across my lap, already charting where I'd go next. I thought I had control, but I had no idea that by the end of that week, everything I believed about survival and about what roams America's darkest places would be shattered. That first night, I slept like a stone deep and undisturbed. The woods kept its usual nighttime orchestra. Owls calling, coyotes yelping far off, the soft skitter of small things moving through the leaf litter. Nothing in that soundtrack hinted I was anything but another campsite in the dark. The second day stripped that illusion away. Breaking camp that morning, I noticed something that made me stop dead. The usual dawn chorus, the small loud business of birds greeting the light, was gone. The forest should have been full of song, 100 little alarms and greetings. Instead, it was a hush, so complete it set my teeth on edge. After a lifetime in the wild, you learn to read the quiet as closely as you read tracks or clouds. When the birds go mute, something big is usually nearby. My hand slid to the grip of my revolver before I even realized it. Bears are common here. A startled, cornered bear will ruin your day, but the tree line gave me nothing to fix on. I watched, waited, 30 minutes that felt like an hour. Maybe the birds were late. Maybe some nocturnal event spooked them. I started hiking anyway. The silence followed me, mile after mile, not a single warble or chip from a squirrel, no darting shadow, no insects thrumming. It was like walking through a place where life had been politely asked to leave. The trail climbed into the country where hardwoods give way to spruce and fir, the old, wind-bitten crowns that sit on the highest ridges. There, beside a skinny stream, I found the first thing that made my stomach drop. A print pressed deep into the mud, enormous, at least 18 inches long, 8 inches across, with toe impressions spaced like a different species' handwriting. It had the clear, barefoot detail of toes, but the proportions were all wrong for a man. Too long, too narrow, the arch too exaggerated. It read like an upright walker that wasn't human. I've tracked everything from elk to mountain lions. I can tell a bear's smear from a giant boot. This matched nothing in my book. The depth told me the maker was heavy, way heavier than any person. Then I saw more prints, a single-file trail following the stream. Someone or something had been moving slowly along the bank, pausing to drink or forage. The trail ran into thick timber and vanished where the leaf cover kept impressions from holding. As the afternoon went on, other signs showed up. Branches were broken off high in the canopy, fresh, bright wood where a 6-inch limb had been snapped as if by a hand with the strength of a winch. These weren't old storm breaks. They looked recent, violent, deliberate. By the time I picked a campsite in a small clearing at the edge of the spruce stand, my nerves were frayed. I chose the spot for the same reasons I always do. High ground, clear sight lines, trees behind me that make any approach noisy. I made the fire bigger than usual and kept the 357 within reach. The oppressive quiet pressed in. Every small noise felt like an alarm. Wood settled, the spruce sighed, a branch popped in the distance, and I flinched at each one. Sometime after midnight, while I lay on my back, staring up through the gaps in the canopy, I saw movement at the edge of the clearing. A shape had stepped into the tree line, 50 yards from my fire, and for the first time that week, I felt unquestionably watched. At first, I told myself it was just a bear nosing around for scraps, but the longer I watched that silhouette, the less that explanation held water. It wasn't hunched over, and it wasn't on all fours. Whatever stood at the tree line was upright. Broad shoulders, thick torso, towering height, a figure built like a giant man but far too massive to be one. Easily 8 feet tall, maybe more. I inched my hand toward the revolver, every movement deliberate. The steel felt icy against my palm as I eased my fingers around the grip, keeping it tucked inside my sleeping bag so I wouldn't trigger a charge. We sat like that, me, and it locked in a silent standoff for minutes that stretched thin as wire. Its stillness unnerved me more than anything. Bears shift their weight, snort, paw the ground. This thing just watched. Then, without a sound, the shape slipped back into the trees. No heavy footfalls, no brush cracking under its weight. One moment it was there, the next it was swallowed whole by the dark. I sat up the rest of the night with my back to the fire, revolver never leaving my hand, throwing wood into the flames just to push the shadows farther out. Every snap, every sigh of the wind set my nerves on edge. Dawn finally broke, gray light washing over the clearing. The forest seemed to breathe again, almost normal, but my gut told me normal was long gone. The fourth day opened under heavy skies. Low clouds stacked over the ridges like artillery. My weather sense told me trouble was rolling in fast. Pressure dropping, wind shifting northwest, a front barreling down. I'd planned to push higher into the peaks that day, but I knew better. Getting caught on an exposed ridge in a mountain storm is suicide. Lightning hunts the high ground, and cold rain will strip heat from your bones in hours. By midday, fat drops spattered through the canopy. Thunder cracked closer, lightning strobing even through daylight gloom. I had no choice. I needed shelter, and quick. I was still miles from my intended campsite and nowhere near the marked lean-tos on my topo map. That's when I saw it. A shadow of an opening, half hidden behind rhododendron and broken rock. A cave. Under any other circumstance, I would have avoided it. Caves are prime real estate for bears and worse. But the storm was already breathing down my neck. With revolver in hand, I stepped toward the entrance. The opening was tall enough for me to walk in without crawling, though I had to duck my head under the lip. I called out, loud and sharp, hoping to stir anything bedded down inside. My voice echoed back, hollow and empty. No growl, no shift of movement. After a long pause, I clicked on my flashlight and stepped in. What I found froze me to the core. This wasn't a natural cave. The walls bore the unmistakable signs of hands, stones, stacked deliberately to widen passages, crude shelves hacked out of the rock, and the walls themselves were painted, covered in markings that caught the beam of my light, like warnings scrawled by another world. The pigments were earthy reds and browns, smeared and daubed into figures, hunting scenes, primitive and raw men with spears chasing elk or deer, but mixed among the familiar shapes were others, tall, hulking beings that weren't men, painted as both hunters and prey. My skin crawled. Deeper in, my light found more evidence of habitation. The floor was layered with pine boughs and moss, built into bedding that reeked of use. Not a den scraped by animals. This was arranged. Intentional. Lived in. They'd left me alive, but not by mercy, so much as choice. That realization hit me like a blow as I took in what lay inside that cave. Pine bough mattresses lay in neat bundles, bones from deer and smaller game were scattered about, and some still had dried meat clinging to them. Berries, nuts, and gathered roots were piled in little heaps. Whoever lived here ate everything. The plant material wasn't centuries old. It smelled fresh. Some of the bones looked recently picked clean. This place had been used recently. I was backing toward the mouth of the cave when a low rumble rolled out of the darkness. At first, I blamed the storm thunder echoing off stone, but the sound carried an animal cadence that thunder doesn't have. It was a vocalization, guttural, low, and not any call I knew. It moved closer. I turned to the opening and froze. Standing there, framed against the gray rain, was a mountain of a creature. It was covered in dark brown hair and stood 8 feet or more. Up close, the shape read female. The hips, the curve of the torso, she was a mother. Cradled against her chest was a tiny, folded thing that knocked the breath out of me. An infant clinging to her, head tucked into that broad, hairy forearm. I had walked into a den. I had sat in the home of a mother with her baby. She answered my light with a sound that was half roar, half keening scream, pure, raw fury. Her intent was obvious. I was a threat. Her movements were direct, a lethal mix of protection and aggression. There was no bargaining with what moved on instinct. I had maybe 3 seconds to do something. My hand closed on the revolver, but the thought of firing at a creature holding an infant stopped me cold. I couldn't bring myself to shoot. Instead, I lunged for a narrow seam between her and the cave wall, praying my bulk would squeeze past. She was terrifyingly quick for something that size. Her hands whipped out like tree trunks, claws raking across my pack and tearing the canvas as if it were tissue. The blow knocked me forward and, miraculously, toward the opening. I tumbled into the storm. Rain hit me like fists, wind boiled through the trees, and lightning split the sky into harsh whites. The mother's roars cut through the thunder behind me. I ran with no plan, only a single objective: put everything I could between her and me. Branches lashed my face, roots tried to catch my feet, and the rain soaked through to my skin in minutes. Adrenaline and cold made my hands numb. I could barely keep the gun from slipping. Visibility dropped to a few feet. The world blurred into gray. I lost track of direction, lost any sense of my map or planned route. I sprinted deeper into the dark, away from rescue and toward anywhere that might hide me. Every now and then I'd hear the forest answer behind me, a splintered crash, a far-off bellow, and I'd find a new stash of speed to put more distance between us. Eventually, exhaustion pinned me against a stand of massive oaks. Their broad crowns blocked some of the rain and offered a brittle semblance of shelter. My legs shook, my lungs burned, my clothes clung like wet rags. Darkness slid back in as the storm lost its teeth, but the danger had not passed. The cold was seeping and hypothermia now a real threat, and I was hopelessly lost in some of the most remote timber east of the Mississippi. Worse, I realized I wasn't alone. The sounds coming through the dark were not the scatter of voles or the patter of raccoons. These were deliberate, heavy footfalls, something large moving with purpose through the trees. The thing that had chased me from its lair was still hunting. It was closing. I needed concealment, and I needed it fast. I clicked my flashlight off and on only when absolutely necessary, saving the eye of the beam for a quick sweep. Most trees here were saplings, not enough mass to hide a grown man, and the understory was thin. I flattened myself against wet leaves and rotted duff, hugging the ground, trying to become part of the forest floor. Every breath felt loud in my ears. Every snapped twig might betray me. It was then I saw it, an ancient oak, a giant 6 feet thick, its trunk scarred by centuries of storms and lightning strikes. On the far side, hidden from the direction of the approaching sounds, age and rot had eaten out a hollow just big enough for a man to wedge himself into. It wasn't much, but it was all I had. Before forcing myself inside, instinct told me to do something I'm convinced kept me alive. I dropped to my knees and smeared handfuls of mud and wet leaves over every exposed inch of skin and fabric. The mess was cold, stinking, and miserable, but it dulled my scent. If those things hunted by smell, maybe it would be enough to throw them off. I squeezed into the hollow just as the footfalls closed in. Each step carried weight you could feel in the ground, slow, deliberate, searching. Through a narrow gap in the bark, I angled one eye into the forest. What I saw nearly stopped my heart. The mother from the cave wasn't alone anymore. She'd been joined by another, a male, bigger, at least 9 feet tall, his shoulders impossibly wide, arms long enough to brush his knees. His body was sheathed in dark hair, his face a twisted cross between man and ape. He was hunting me. The male sniffed the air, head swinging side to side, eyes gleaming with a sharpness that was unmistakably intelligent. Several times his gaze swept directly over the oak I hid inside. My body locked rigid, certain he'd found me, but each time he moved on, prowling the clearing with a patience that was almost worse than aggression. The mud was working. It masked me just enough to confuse him. Still, he came within 10 feet more than once. I heard the deep rush of his breathing, felt the rumble of his chest in the air, saw the flicker of thought behind his eyes. He was calculating, testing. The hours dragged on like years. My muscles screamed from holding still, my body shaking from cold and adrenaline. Finally, as dawn began to bleed gray light through the canopy, the male let out a guttural growl, low, angry, and frustrated. Then he turned and faded into the forest with the silence no creature that size should have been capable of. I stayed wedged inside that hollow for another hour, barely daring to breathe. Only when the woods held nothing but the normal stirrings of morning did I crawl out. Every joint in my body was stiff, every movement agonizing. The mud that had hidden me had dried into a brittle crust that cracked with each step. But I was alive, and that was more than I expected when the chase began. My compass was useless without knowing where I stood. The storm had stripped away my sense of direction. My maps meant nothing now. I didn't know north from south, only that I was buried deep in hostile country. 7 days alone had once seemed like the pinnacle of my survival journey. Now, after one night in this nightmare, all I wanted was out. The mission had changed. No more peaks, no more tests, just survival. Just finding a way back to civilization before the mountains or the things that ruled them finished what they'd started. Getting out alive became my only objective. The mountains no longer felt like a proving ground. They were a prison I needed to escape. I swore to move only in daylight and to steer clear of any terrain that might serve as den or patrol ground for the things I'd encountered. That meant clawing my way along ridge lines, bushwhacking through thickets, and forcing myself over ground even black bears would avoid. If it slowed me down, good. If it made the route harder, better. Anything to keep distance between me and them. Before setting out, I took stock of what I had left. The mother's claws had shredded my pack, and half my gear was gone. My rations were intact, but my purification tablets were scattered somewhere back in the storm. That left me with a single canteen, one slip away from dehydration. The revolver was still at my side, but after what I'd seen, it felt about as useful as a slingshot. I spread my topo maps across a dry rock and forced myself to think like a navigator, not prey. The storm had carried me miles off course, but by studying slope lines and following the water's flow, I pieced together a rough estimate of where I was. The way out meant cross-country travel through some of the worst terrain in Appalachia, and doing it while hunted, but staying wasn't an option. The next 48 hours became a crash course in survival paranoia. I placed each step as if my life depended on it, because it did. I stayed off soft ground, choosing stone or hardpack whenever possible. When streams crossed my path, I'd wade upstream for hundreds of yards before climbing out, hoping to break any trail they might try to follow. I refused myself fire, eating cold jerky in silence, choking it down without smoke or flame to betray me. At night, I tucked myself into tight cover, thorn thickets, rock shelves, the kind of places that tore skin and bruised ribs. Sleep came in fragments, broken by every sound, every shift of wind. And the silence was always there. The mountains had gone mute, still stripped of birdsong, still missing the chatter of small animals. It was as if the whole forest was holding its breath. Signs of them cropped up again and again. Giant prints pressed deep into mud along stream banks. Branches broken high above the ground where no man could reach. Vegetation shoved aside as if freight trains had pushed through. Sometimes I saw shapes move in the corner of my vision, tall, dark masses that melted away when I looked straight at them. Always there, always just out of reach, watching, but it seemed they weren't closing in. Maybe they recognized I was retreating. Maybe they were letting me go. I clung to that thought, let it drag me forward mile after mile, until finally, blessedly, the terrain began to look familiar. My reckoning said I was within 5 miles of the Forest Service road. The idea of hot food, a warm bed, the hum of an engine, was enough to keep my legs moving even as exhaustion hollowed me out. It was late afternoon when I stumbled into the clearing and stopped cold. By the stream sat a structure, not rockfall, not storm debris, a dwelling. Massive logs stacked and interlocked to form walls, smaller branches woven into a crude roof. The whole thing stood 12 feet high, 20 across, built on a scale no human could manage without heavy machinery. And in that moment, hope gave way to dread. Civilization wasn't 5 miles ahead. I was standing in the heart of theirs. I crouched low in the brush, staring at the structure in the clearing. This wasn't just a cave or a temporary den. This was a home. The logs showed tool marks. The roof, crude as it was, had been engineered. Whoever built this had a plan, a system. It wasn't animal instinct, it was intelligence. Then the doorframe filled. Another one stepped out, the biggest I'd seen, 10 feet tall, every inch of him muscle and sinew, moving with a confidence that screamed, this was his land. My heart hammered as he scanned the clearing. Then his eyes found mine. I had no business believing I was hidden. He saw me, no question, and for a long, freezing moment we just stared at each other. Then came a sound low, rumbling, almost a laugh. The message was as clear as words. I see you. I've always seen you, and you're alive because I allow it. With that, he turned, walking back into the forest like he owned it, which he did. The silence behind him was worse than the roar of any predator. When I finally crawled out of my hiding place, my blood ran cold. Fresh prints circled the oak I'd been crouched under. While I was watching him, others had been watching me. I hadn't just been spotted, I'd been surrounded, evaluated, judged, and, for reasons I'll never understand, spared. The last miles blurred together. My body was running on adrenaline alone. When the glint of my truck's metal finally cut through the trees, I nearly collapsed. Civilization. My truck sat waiting, untouched, like the world I knew hadn't even noticed what had just happened to me. My hands shook so badly I couldn't get the key in the door on the first try. When the engine roared to life, it felt like I'd ripped open a curtain between two worlds. The drive out was surreal. Traffic lights, gas stations, the sound of voices, all of it felt louder, harsher, unreal. At the first station I pulled into, I bought coffee and donuts that tasted like a banquet. The clerk gave me a look. I was still caked in mud and leaves, eyes wild, looking like I'd clawed my way out of hell. And in truth, I had. I never went back. Not to the mountains, not to the 7-day challenges, not to the life I'd built around Shackleton's creed of endurance. Because what I found out there wasn't about endurance. It wasn't about skill. It was about something that could track me, surround me, and kill me anytime it wanted and chose not to. Since October 1992, I've read the stories. Hikers, hunters, campers. The lucky ones who come back talking about massive hairy figures, primitive shelters, or strange silences that blanket the woods. I believe every single one. I know the truth. Those silences aren't emptiness. They're warnings. The Appalachian Mountains keep their secrets well, and I pray they always will. There are boundaries man was never meant to cross. Those creatures tolerated me until I intruded too far, and then they gave me a warning I'll carry to my grave. Stay out of the deep places. Respect the old boundaries. Remember that in the raw wilderness, we are not the apex predator. We never were. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear that low rumble in my dreams. And sometimes I wonder if they remember me too, the foolish man who wandered too far into their world and somehow walked out alive. But I fear a day will come when civilization pushes too far into theirs and tolerance ends. On that day, all our technology, our weapons, our illusions of mastery over nature will crumble, and we'll remember what we once knew long ago, that we are prey and the shadows are full of older things. I was allowed to leave. Others may not be so lucky.